Hello and welcome. This is Millennial and a Gen Z Talk About, and today we're going to be talking about the 1997 movie Face Off, which stars Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. So, your host for today is me. My name's Brian, also known as the Tank Thinker, and I'm a millennial.
And I'm Brandon Price, the Gen Z.
Yeah, so we watched this movie for the first time last night. I think I've seen clips from this movie before because some of them seemed familiar to me, but I've never seen the movie in its entirety, and honestly, I didn't really even know it existed.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I've always heard about the movie from my dad and my mom, and they've always talked about if you like Nicolas Cage, this is definitely his one of his best movies. But like you, I had never really seen it. I had seen a few clips, particularly the scene where Nicolas Cage is dressed up as a priest, singing Hallelujah. I remember that clip very vividly. But besides that, I didn't really know anything about the movie.
Yeah, we literally went in. Besides seeing that one clip where he's at the beginning. Oh, just as a warning, this podcast episode is gonna have spoilers on the movie.
Yes,
I
yes, it
think
does.
spoiler warnings aren't really needed for movies that are over 20 years old, but just in case anyway.
Yeah, go watch the movie. It's fantastic. You won't regret it.
Yeah, then come back and listen to us. But so yeah, we literally just all I knew about this movie was just that scene where he's like dancing in the priest outfit, and I was like, no, I want to go in completely blind. Besides that,
Yeah. But I think that turned out for the better. You know.
and yeah, I honestly I did not know what to expect. I mean, we're huge Nicolas Cage fans. We've become that over time. It sort of started as a joke, but I think since the Willy's Wonderland movie,
Yes.
since the
We've
Willy's
really.
Wonderland movie, and Lord of War is one of my close to one of my favorite movies as well. So I always knew Nicolas Cage for a long time, and I was a huge fan. But we become even huger fans. So to us, we
Yes.
were really excited going in, right?
Yeah, especially because I heard great things. If you search up, best Nicolas Cage movies, a lot of times this is picked as number one.
Well, there you go.
Um, so
So
I'm glad to finally watch it.
yeah, for sure. So we really didn't know what to expect except for the fact that Nicolas Cage was good in it and that he was going to be in it. I didn't even really know that John Travolta was in it until right before we started watching it. But I would say John Travolta is more of the main character than
Yeah,
Nicolas
I,
Cage's
I I'd
character.
say so. Yeah,
But
I
Nicolas Cage still plays a major role, right?
yes. So
So
where do you
let's
want
talk
to?
about our overall impressions of the movie. Just like broad stroke stuff. We won't go into anything
Yeah.
too specific. But yeah, why don't you lead us off?
So after finishing the movie, I was really surprised because on paper this movie is very complicating, very hard to pull off. Two actors basically trying to play one another is a difficult task, and I think it worked well. I think John Travolta and Nicolas Cage are perfect for their parts. And I remember the first time we see John Travolta acting like Nicolas Cage's character. And I thought he was a little off. But as the movie progressed, I thought he got really, really good.
Yeah,
Both of
my
them
my
playing each other.
impression is that it was a great movie. I mean, I still think that there's a lot of '90s cheesiness in it,
Yeah,
but somehow it's not like it doesn't feel like that '90s cheesiness is something pulling the movie down. It somehow works with the movie,
yeah,
and
especially
that's
with the
pretty
tone.
rare.
Exactly. I think just the '90s cheesy charm works so well with Nicolas Cage, man.
Yeah, and even John Travolta kind of
Yeah, yeah,
was
yeah,
good
yeah.
too. But overall, I really enjoyed the movie. I look forward to watching it again someday when it's a little bit distant from my memory. But I
Same.
especially kind of now knowing what happens because there is a little bit of a twist early, kind of in the early middle part of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a good segue into talking about the plot and the story concept.
Yeah, this movie's very hard to explain.
It pushes the boundary. It's a little bit of sci-fi.
I'd say yeah. So with the whole kind of face swapping,
Pushes the
like
boundaries
yeah.
of science, especially at the time. Like I don't even think they can do that now.
Yeah,
But
I
they
have
did,
no
and they were
idea.
trying they were trying to say that it could be done 1977, but 1997. But at the end of the day, I don't think it matters too much.
Yeah, I did read something that the movie was originally supposed to be sci-fi or sorry, take place in the future.
Just so that the
Which I,
technology would make sense,
yeah, it
right?
would make sense, but ultimately I think the time period works fine for the movie. It is stretching it a little bit, but it's all in good fun.
But it's
It's all in
fine.
good fun.
It's like you what's it called? You temper your expectations about what's reality, and you say, okay, I can just roll with this.
Exactly. Perfectly said.
It doesn't have to be too complicated. Let's just roll with it. There's some doctors and surgeons that can do some crazy
Yeah.
stuff, and essentially what happens is, we've given a spoiler warning already, but John Travolta needs to stop this terrorist attack, so he's going to take
Nicolas Cage's
Nicolas
face. Nicolas
Cage's
Cage is a
face.
criminal, by the way. Nicolas Cage is a criminal
A
who was
terrorist,
part of
a
yes, a
hardcore
terrorist.
terrorist who
Terrorist,
just wants to see the world burn.
hilarious terrorist. That basically what happens is Nicolas Cage's character had also killed John Travolta's son.
So there's a history
Um,
between them.
yes, these are between the two. And eventually John Travolta finally puts down Nicolas Cage. And our boy Nick Cage is, I think, put into a coma, or he's like a vegetable or something. He can't move. He's pretty
Yep,
much
yeah, that's right.
almost dead. So basically, in order to stop the bomb, I believe they do a procedure where they were gonna cut off John Travolta's face temporarily and take Nicolas Cage's face and put it on.
Yeah,
So
so
John
just so
Travolta will
you
look like
understand,
Nicolas Cage.
they're not making a fake, a John Nicolas Cage face for John Travolta. They're
It's
literally getting the skin off of Nicolas
Nicolas
Cage's
Cage's
face,
vegetable body and putting it on
putting it
John
on.
Travolta, which seems a
And
little wild, but it
yeah,
worked.
yeah, and the reason, and I guess that's why it's called Face Off. But the reason why is so that he can go talk to Nicolas Cage's character's brother, so he can get the location of where the bomb's gonna be.
Yes, but
So
this
real
doesn't
quick,
really go to
a
plan.
problem happens while, as he goes into the prison where his brother's being held, and he's being Nicolas Cage, and
Yeah, acting
essentially
like a
what
prisoner.
happens is Nicolas Cage wakes up from his coma,
And
and
basically takes John Travolta's face, and puts it on himself. So now,
forces gets his
yeah,
goons to force the surgeon to come in and put John Travolta's face on him. And they
exactly.
also do some stuff for the voice, like they have a chip inside the throat so they sound like the person too and
Yeah,
stuff. And
yeah. But
but
basically, Nicolas Cage now has John Travolta's face, so they're, you know what I mean. They're basically, had now in real life though, the two actors pretty much have to play each other, which is a very difficult task. At hand, an actor having to play someone else, it's definitely not easy.
yeah, well,
Especially because
it's a little bit harder too because you have to play your character at first,
act,
and
yeah,
then you have to play the other character of the other actor,
yes, it's
right?
yes. And also because I think they're very distinct people, especially Nicolas Cage, right? So you really have to nail it for the movie to work. If those two performances didn't work, the whole movie is ruined.
Yeah.
But they nailed it, thankfully.
And they did make it a little bit easier because the characters, I felt both characters, this is, I guess, our segue into the characters section. Both characters were a little bit stereotypical. They had strong stereotypes, like Sean Archer, who is John Travolta's character, was the pained FBI field officer.
You know,
He was in charge of the field office, the super secret field office that was investigating the terrorist, right? So he's like
yeah,
that pained guy, and he's stressed, and he's curt with people, and
and a
he's
little
thing
tough in the job, that kind of guy.
yeah, and really obsessed with the job, and not focusing on his family too much, right? So it's a little bit of a stereotypical character,
Yeah,
and same with Castor Troy, who
Nicolas
is
Cage's character is
exactly
Nicolas Cage, basically. Nicolas Cage plays himself, in my opinion, a little bit.
a little bit of a crazier
Uh,
version.
An exaggerated version of Nicolas Cage, in my opinion.
Yeah, and more what's the word?
Criminal, a bit more of a criminal.
Yeah, more like he just doesn't give a shit. He's willing to do anything. Like, imagine an over the top Nicolas Cage, and if you watch like a movie like The Assignment, for example, and you remember the terrorist from that movie, who was the it was based off the Jackal. It reminded me very much of the Jackal's character, except Nicolas Cage, and he's he's a man who does not give a shit. He's looking for he does things for enjoyment, and he does things because he can, and because he's hardcore alpha, and he gets into a fight and he's laughing and he's having a good time, and he wants to, and he's a little bit deranged.
Yeah, and he's always cracking up jokes, and he's always got that Nicolas Cage smile, that deranged smile, which is hilarious. Like the movie, we literally see in like the first 5 minutes, we see him dressed up as a priest dancing to the choir, and then grabbing a girl's ass. You know?
Yeah, a very young girl's ass. So you kind of get a sense of like how they're setting the stage for how much of a villain he is and what type of a villain he is. Right? He's not a sophisticated like Bond villain that has plans for the world. He's a slightly deranged, fun-loving, crazy, alpha kind of hound terrorist.
Yes.
He's like a hound. He's just going after what's kind of in his environment and what he can do, and he's having fun. And that's sort of shown because when him and John Travolta at the beginning of the movie are facing off, one of the things he tells Sean Archer, John Travolta's character, is throughout all of this, we're going through all this shit. We've been fighting for years, and you're still not having fun, right? His whole thing is you're not having fun. This is fun.
Yeah.
Doing this because this is fun.
Right. And one of my other favorite aspects of this movie, that surprised me was the action set pieces. Some really surprisingly good practical I love practical stunts and practical, scenes. You know what I mean? That are not too heavy on CGI because everything feels more grounded and real. Particularly there's this great boat chase at the end that I read is pretty much all practical. That's something I love to see, especially with my love of the Indiana Jones movies. Right? That's kind of where it stems
exactly.
from.
One thing that should be explained. Sorry. Finish your thought.
It's kind of got like classic '90s action. A few slow-mo scenes here and there. The director, John Chu, I think his name is John Chu, I think?
I think so.
It's kind of got his classic flair where the character jumps midair, shooting everything, you know what I mean? Kind of seen a Mission Impossible 2,
yeah,
I think.
everything's, it should be explained, the action feels very over the top. Like,
yes.
you'll never see the kind of stuff that they were doing in, like, a real-life shootout, for example. It's it's guys, they see the guy coming towards them, so they jump, and as they're jumping, they're firing shots, and then they're flipping, and there's slow-mo shots, and there's birds flying behind them in like scenic. It's very artistic.
And explosions everywhere. Explosions
absolutely everywhere. I think it's meant to be more of a piece of art as opposed to a scene depicting what it's really like, for agents and criminals and terrorists to be fighting. And I actually love it for that.
Yeah.
I always prefer the stuff that's more realistic, typically, but it worked well in this movie because it's like it was complementing Nicolas Cage's crazy character, or even John Travolta in this movie. Like when he switches and he's playing Castor Troy, the terrorist, even how he becomes, because he starts, acting like his personality. John Travolta was great.
Yeah, 100%,
and he came off as creepy and scary, and it's funny because at the beginning of the movie, I thought John Travolta's acting was like almost abysmal, like really bad.
Yeah, there's like this like the scene where it's like Nicolas Cage is stuck in this is where it's gonna go. John Travolta's character. That's played by Nicolas Cage, right? Sean, I think.
Sean Archer,
yeah. Sean Archer, who's stuck in prison, is getting a confrontation by Castor Troy, who has the face of John Travolta.
Yeah, he comes to see him and confront him and to reveal, hey, I have your face in your body.
Yeah. At first, the first few lines I felt a little off. It's like, wow, you good looking. He says something like that. It felt a little too much at first.
Almost cringy.
It didn't. I felt like it felt like a caricature of Nicolas Cage. But as the movie progressed, John Travolta just got really good especially near the end.
Absolutely. It
I
was it was like it was almost creepy because in my head I remember watching the beginning of the movie and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to sit through this movie with John Travolta's like bland acting. And I think the reason why they did that bland acting was what I said before. They were trying to make a stereotype of
I
him
guess,
as
yeah,
the cop, right? But
could be,
but
yeah.
it turns in such an unexpected way, and I gained a lot of respect for John Travolta from
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
him.
There's this one part where I think like John Travolta says like what the fuck, but like he says it so Nicolas Cage like it's so hilarious.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
It's great. It's great.
And
But I
Nicolas Cage did a great job at like at the parts where he's he's experiencing distress and he's
yeah.
scared and he's freaked out because like he did that so well
Oh
as
yeah.
well, right?
I guess we could also talk about you to move segue into a favorite scene of ours,
Yes,
which is
I do want to say hold on, I want to talk a little bit more about the action set pieces before we get into that.
yeah. Okay.
Which
So
is to
all right.
say there I think there's a lot of this movie, what I found is it has a great tempo of going from action to storytelling, back to action to storytelling. It's almost like a heartbeat. And it
Yeah.
has these moments of intense action, and then you go back into the storytelling and then intense action. I feel like a lot of movies don't do this tempo well, and this
Yeah.
movie did. And they climax with the boat scene that you mentioned before at the end.
This boat scene is fantastic. Definitely one of my top set pieces of all time now.
And
Like I
and
mentioned, it's
it
all
doesn't
time
it
goal.
feel more intense than like James Bond? I
Yeah,
know
there is
they
a
had
scene.
like a
They had a boat chase, I think, with Roger Moore at one point, like
mhm.
one of the older Bond movies. I think there's a boat chase with Roger Moore. So when I first saw this, I thought I've seen boat set pieces before, and I find they're a little boring.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I thought, okay, here we go. You know what I mean? There was even a boat set piece in Indiana Jones, which I thought was fine, but I think this topped that one.
Yeah,
Um,
and one thing that I think worked with it so well was they through storytelling, the plot and the strength of the characters and the actors who did it, you felt this tension throughout the entire movie between these two characters, so that when it erupts in an action scene, you actually feel a sense of real tension, as
exactly.
opposed to if it's James Bond following some random goons so that he can get a USB drive or something, right? And that's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, here we go, he's gonna get this. It was like they were neck and neck. It was like one of those horse races where it's like 1 millimeter off on both of them, and
Yeah.
and you feel that tension and the excitement courses through you.
Yeah. And another thing that's important with action that I think a lot of, especially today, a lot of action movies to deal with is the movie should feel like a story, a good story that happens to have action in it. It should not feel like an action movie that also has a story. This movie feels like it has a great story that also has action, which
I
is
I think it's almost like a perfect balance. This movie is a perfect balance of both.
exactly, you know, what I
Yeah.
feel like I think a lot of action movies is they'll throw the story to the side and just have the set pieces as their show off. But
I
this movie, I think, had a great balance of both.
Absolutely. I will say the weakness of this movie, I think it's great, even though it wasn't that bad. But one of the greatest weaknesses is some of the dialogue is a little bit stale, I think, at times.
Yeah, it
And
does.
that's not even necessarily between the main characters. Sometimes the side characters have some like stale, and it comes off as a little bit weird at times. But
Yeah,
but
there are a
it's
lot of
fine.
interesting. There are a lot of interesting moments that I think that would just not happen today.
Yeah.
Like for like there's like a scene where like there happen to be doves randomly in the scene, and like the whole thing, it's like in the prison, it's got like these metal boots that are hooked to like the prison ground.
Yeah.
It's like something you wouldn't normally see. I feel like that scene with the whole prison with the
Yeah, and
metal
and another thing, like there's like certain aspects of the story, little pieces here and there that don't really make sense. Like for example, you remember when he's about to sit in the chair, he's about to get electrocuted, and then he
yes,
tells the other guy like, "I didn't sleep with your wife and your sister." I'm
yeah,
sure
and
there
then
were
he gets out.
like he kind of just forgave him right away. That didn't really make sense.
Yeah, and there are a few things that like, for instance, like Nicolas Cage at one, or sorry, Sean, is trying to escape the prison, and at one point he just he escapes the prison, but it turns out the prison is like on like a ship in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, and they don't
and
really explain how
he
he got
just
away.
jumps off and he just jumps into the ocean, and that's it. They just cut.
Yeah, and
That's
then the
it.
cops just assumed he was dead.
Yeah, they just
Remember,
okay, yeah,
and
all right,
Nicolas Cage's character gets mad because he's like, "Is there a body? Then let me know he's dead when you find a body. Why are you telling me he's dead without even
right.
seeing it?"
And they just cut to him to just Sean being completely fine. It was. I felt like that was a little odd.
Yeah, so
I
they
felt like a scene
parse
with.
over some pretty important parts but the movie's so good that you really don't care. It's kind of like the
Exactly.
face thing. It's like I'm enjoying this anyway, so who cares if they skip over this, right?
Exactly.
One of the
Um,
greatest strengths, before we get into our favorite scenes, one of the greatest strengths of this movie, and I mentioned this multiple times while watching it, is the music was fantastic.
yeah, I think it really
Surprisingly.
worked. I like
Like
the church scene. I think the
the
church music was
church scene,
fantastic.
they had it felt like the music was on point for almost every single scene, which is
Yeah.
rare in a movie. Sometimes you don't notice the music because it's just bland, or sometimes it's only at certain parts. This movie, like so many parts, it was just so good and it worked so well with the scene. And I have to give props to whoever. I even joked
The
at one
soundtrack.
point that they took money away from the dialogue and put it towards
The
the music
soundtrack,
itself.
huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, a great, really good soundtrack. I especially love the church scene. I thought the music was beautiful there.
Okay, so do you
Uh,
want to start with your favorite scene?
my favorite scene. You know what? I'm thinking I might agree with yours, to be honest.
Ooh,
Which
okay. You
is
you got to pick a different one because I picked mine first.
that's true. Okay, you go ahead and say yours.
Okay, so my favorite scene there's this part after John Travolta's character wearing Nicolas Cage's face, right? So he's to everybody in the outside world, he is the terrorist Castor Troy. So
Yeah.
he goes to go see Castor Troy's friends, his old friends, because his plan now is to build himself a network to get some support in order to go after the real Castor Troy who has his body. So he goes to see his friends, and he gets there, and you can see they're treating him as if he's Castor Troy, as if he's the terrorist, and he is a little bit jaded by this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I have to play the part. I have to be Castor Troy." And you see that the whole in that moment, what was so powerful about it is in that moment, I think the reality of his situation came bearing down on him so strongly that he temporarily transformed himself into Castor Troy, like he was actually Castor Troy, and you see on his face that he's starting to think like him. He grabs the drink, he does a lot, snort some coke. He grabs the drink and drinks it, and then they ask him, they're like, well, what are we gonna do now? And he's like, I'm gonna go after Sean Archer. And he's like, oh, so what are you gonna do to him once we get him? And in his face you see that crazy Nicolas Cage face, and you see that John Travolta's character Sean Archer has become the deranged terrorist. And normal Sean Archer would say, I'm gonna get him, or I'm gonna kill him, or I'm gonna do this, but he says, I'm gonna take his face off, and he makes this expression,
Yeah.
and then he does this thing with his hand, and he goes, face off, and put it on my face, and it's really creepy and intense, and you're like, holy shit, like he's really losing it. And even his friends who are used to crazy Castor Troy, the crazy terrorist guy, even they're like, holy fuck, like he's lost it. So he
No more
went
drugs
even
for him.
more overboard than, yeah, they said,
Yeah.
like, no more drugs for that guy, right? And then right after that scene, there's a scene he's looking in the mirror, and he makes that face. Remember that really fucked up
Yeah,
face?
that
Oh, I
fucked up
love that
Nicolas Cage
scene.
face.
That scene, I think
That
that was
that
such
was
a vital
fantastic.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. I think that also is, in my opinion, the greatest scene in the movie. But I also have to nominate another scene. I have to nominate. We talked about the boat scene. Fantastic. Um, I still love this movie's opening. I just that priest scene. I know it technically not nearly as deep as the scene you just talked about. And technically, I
And
think that
I
is the
think
best scene.
that scene, I don't think that's like a real scene. I think that's like sort of something that was imagined,
Yeah, actually, you
right?
could be completely right.
I think that the girl who was in the choir is the daughter. I could be
Could be.
wrong about that.
No
So
idea.
I think it was more of like a scene to show off what his character was like.
Yeah, I love that opening. Number one, it's hilarious. It's the scene that made me want to watch the movie. I think it just shows off Nicolas Cage's character perfectly, which is he's hilarious. Nicolas Cage is doing a great job acting it, but at the same time, he's still a little fucked up.
And he's a deranged badass.
Exactly. And so I think that opening sets the tone perfect. It also just, I think this is the type of movie we're doing. This is the type of movie where literally the opening goes from a kid getting shot, John Travolta's kid getting shot, to Nicolas Cage dancing as a priest. This is the type of movie that we're going to see. We're going to see a lot of serious and fantastic scenes like you mentioned, but at the same time, we're going to see a lot of over the top yet hilarious moments as well.
And you want to know something else about that scene as well?
What's that?
It hints towards what's going to happen later in the movie because he's wearing the priest outfit, right?
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you kind of right on that point. Yeah, I
Yeah,
never
so
thought about it
it's
like
kind of
that.
saying he's gonna wear, he's gonna wear the persona of someone else while being
Yeah,
him.
that's actually a good point. You know, I never thought about that. That's a good
And
take.
it's funny, like they didn't do that with the John Travolta's character. They did it with his character because even when we were watching, we didn't think that that was gonna happen. Remember?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah.
were even saying you're like, I thought this movie was gonna be about both of them switching each other's faces, but it was almost felt like it was set up for only John for us to follow only John Travolta's character.
Yeah, I thought the movie would just Nicolas Cage's character, actually, Troy's dead for the rest of the movie, and then Sean would just be. We would just basically Sean would dress up as Nicolas Cage, and we get his view of
Of the criminal
Nicolas Cage,
terrorist
the
underworld,
criminal
right?
life.
And him
You
trying to
know,
stop the event that's coming.
yeah, and then I thought there might be a moment like he's starting to enjoy his life as a terrorist a little bit, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
he contemplates going back. But you know what?
That
I'm
that would
glad
be a
it
lot more like the movie The
generic.
Assignment. I'm not sure if I ever showed it to you.
I haven't seen it, but I felt that would have been a little bit more generic. But you
Yeah,
know what?
yeah.
I'm happy with the choice they went there. And I gotta say, Face Off, really underrated movie. You know what I mean? I don't hear it as much anymore. I knew it was a very popular movie when it came out.
Hmm.
I think our buddy Jalal mentioned it.
Yeah, and it even did well actually.
It did, yeah, it did really well at the box office too. But it's a movie that you don't really hear from as much anymore. I do hear that they are making a sequel of some sort. And you know what? I'd happily see that. There's no way it's gonna beat the original,
Do you
but
think it's gonna have the same characters? Or sorry, the
I don't
same
know.
actors? The same actors?
I I don't even know if it's gonna have the same characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh,
Like
oh my God!
it
Could
just
you imagine the kid? No. No. It's. I think if they're gonna make a sequel, it's got to be something like completely fresh, and it's like we had this program back in the day that we used, and
yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
thing. Because
exactly.
I don't see how they like John Travolta's really gonna do that shit again, or his character Sean Archer's really gonna do
Yeah,
that shit again. Like you've done the procedure before, we need you to do it. He's gonna be like hell no.
yeah, and I do think it's like a once in a lifetime movie. You cannot recreate this.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I honestly maybe they shouldn't even make a sequel. I think it worked perfectly as it was. I just don't want them to, sully the water, but I'll watch it. But
yeah, we'll watch it.
I
We'll
don't
watch
have
it.
great hopes for it.
But yeah, Face Off.
Face Off. All right, so yeah, and closing thoughts that it was a great movie that really took away my expectations. It superseded my expectations. The beginning's a little bit jarring and confusing and a little bit cringy, but it really, really takes off and turns into something that's really fantastic.
Yeah, definitely a movie that there's no really point in explaining. Just go watch it.
Just
That's
go
all I
watch
say.
it. Okay, so that's the end, and hope you guys have a good one.